Hello, everyone. I want to do a quick video on what the Board of Ethical Review of the NSPE is and what a typical Board of Ethical Review case has in it, as how it's structured. So let's do what we modern people do and Google it. Let's just go to the NSPE website first. Why not? Um, it's the NSPE. It's the National Society of Professional Engineers. It's a lively and good institution, but we're interested in the ethics part of it. So let's go to the Board of Ethical Review link and find out what it is. So yeah, what is the Board of Ethical Review? It's a collection of a rotating collection of they're calling them engineering ethics experts. That they're just PEs. So they're just people who volunteer their time and effort, I believe, um, to do this thing where they review cases of supposed or possible ethical infractions on the part of engineers and come up with these cases for teaching purposes. Right? Board consists of 7 licensed members who are appointed by the NSP president. No, they're not engineering ethics experts, but they're quite good at what they do, I think. Purpose of the BER is to render impartial opinions pertaining to the interpretation of the NSP Code of Ethics. So you can read through here. So, yeah. But what are the cases? The best way to get an idea of what the cases actually are is to just look here, and then I don't know. Let's just click on a case. Doesn't matter which one. If we look at this case, what we should find after the case itself is a kind of a disclaimer at the note. I think it's pretty much at the end of every case. The note is what I'm looking at right here. Note, the NSPE Board of Ethical Review considers ethical cases involving either real or hypothetical matters submitted to it from NSP members, other engineers, public officials, and members of the public. So what that tells you is that these cases are semi-fictional. That is, they are not actually word for word like the facts, are not actually accounts of things that actually happened as they happened. They are quite often based upon real events. But the point is that the Board of Ethical Review is free to shape those events, change facts for the purposes of what the cases actually are, which are teaching material, things for teaching. The BER reviews each case in the context of the NSB Code of Ethics and earlier BER opinions. The facts contained in each case do not necessarily represent all of the pertinent facts submitted to or reviewed by the BER. Each opinion is intended as guidance to individual practicing engineers, students, and the public. So these are teaching materials. These are things that are meant to be read by people like you and me in order to gain some guidance in engineering ethics, but especially in what they actually say, which is um, uh, I'm sorry, I can't find it. How to actually apply the principles of the code of ethics to actual situations. Right. Um, right. So, and again, this opinion is for educational purposes only. Right? So what we see here is not, somebody brought on trial or someone, it is often based upon real events. And I've looked that up. I mean, one of the cases we read, which is really a very, very interesting and troubling case having to do with a design flaw in a medical respirator, I found the real case that it was based upon. And the facts were pretty close to what I could find to be the real facts. So I think that that's really typical is that the Board of Ethical Review will hear of something or something will be suggested to it from something that actually happened, and the board will use that as the source material for a teaching case. That is a BER opinion. So I think that that's really all you need to know. That these are not necessarily true, but oftentimes, and I think most times, are actually based on real events. But because they're not meant to be true, the board can shape the thing in the way that it thinks it will be best for teaching purposes. So we can just, if we want to look at the typical structure of a case, it's right here. Every case that I can think of follows the same structure. There is a set of facts. Okay, and then there is an ethical question that is raised by those facts. Then there are the references to the code of ethics. That is, what you see here on the right hand side are what the Board of Ethical Review judges to be the most relevant sections of the code to the question and the facts. So that's really the guidance there. And that is, this is the idea that if there is some sort of ethical question, that is, a question about whether an engineer acted ethically, the guidance in determining that, whether the engineer acted ethically, should be found in the code. And here are the sections of the code that the BER is using for guidance. But that, of course, those sections of the code need to be interpreted, and that they need to be applied to the facts to decide the question. And that is why we have the discussion, which is really really the most important part, because that's where the contains the analysis and the arguments that allow the Board of Ethical Review to come to the last part of it, and that is the conclusion. And the conclusion at the end is the answer to the initial question. If the question here is, was it ethical for engineer intern A to fail to report, et cetera, after the discussion of that question, here is their conclusion that it was not ethical for them to do what they did. There was some question in class about sanctions, about things like that. I mean, those things occur, and as I said, as far as I know, I'm no expert on that, very, very rarely, but it's really not a factor in these cases. All they're saying is that it was not ethical for this engineer intern to do what they did. So that is the thing. I think that once you know this, or even before it, you know everything that you need to know about the Board of Ethical Review and what a Board of Ethical Review case actually is. As far as preparing for the brief quiz that we take in the beginning of class, I think you should just have a general sense of what the case is about in terms of the facts. You should have a general sense of what the ethical question raised is. As far as what parts of the code are relevant, there's usually, they may mention here, it looks like a half dozen parts of the code. There's usually one part that's most prominent. You should have a sense of what part of the code is in play. You should have a sense of what their discussion is. Although the discussion is extensive, it very often refers to earlier cases that are in the same area. I don't expect that kind of recall. But you should have some sense of what their conclusion is, that is, their answer to their own ethical question. And you should have some sense of what that conclusion is based upon. That is, if we have a conclusion here about the ethics of they matter, whether the engineer, or in this case, engineer intern. That's interesting. Maybe I'll take a look at this case. If they have a conclusion about whether or not what the engineer did was ethical, it will be based upon their reasoning in the discussion section. Last thing I want to say about BER cases, and I wouldn't worry too much about this, but I think that it's true. If in this context at least, the Board of Ethical Review accuses an engineer of acting unethically, that's where this section comes in, I think, as being extremely important, this reference section. Because if an engineer, at least by the Board of Ethical Review, is found to be by them unethical, as having done something unethical, then they must be able to point to a part of the code that the engineer violated. Right? And it can't be some vague sense that they were unethical. It can't be something, well, some common sense idea that they were unethical. They it's really about the application of the code. So if an engineer is found to have been unethical, you got to get specific, and usually they do. Usually they do get specific and give you reasons for thinking that they actually violated a specific part of the code. I think that if they don't do that, which I think occasionally they don't, then it's not really a very serious um, accusation. This is professional ethics. This is engineering ethics, and this is really a matter of whether or not the engineer really did violate some specific concrete part of the code. And if they didn't, then there's no reason to say they did anything unethical.